Okay, this is going to be the video about ratios. We're going to go over it in class, but just going to go pretty quickly. So I think if you just pause this and take notes, this will make class a lot easier, and then you can kind of review it as you need to. All right, I'm going to share my screen, I hope on a good day. Okay, let's pick this PowerPoint and kind of share it. Okay, now what I want to do first is kind of explain the difference between fractions and ratios because they often look a lot alike. We talked about the fact that fractions compare part to whole. So the denominator, that bottom number on a fraction, always tells you how many equally sized pieces make a whole. And then that numerator tells you how many of those pieces you have. So on 2/5, the fraction, if you know that 2/5 is a fraction, you know that that denominator is always how many equally sized pieces make a whole. So the bottom is a whole. And the top is how many pieces or what part you have of that. So fractions do one thing really well, kind of like Chick-fil-A, all right? It does part to whole extremely well. Ratios are a bit more versatile, okay? With ratios, you have to know the context of the problem because ratios can do three different things. They can also compare part to whole like a fraction, but they can also compare whole to part, or they can even compare part to part. So when you look at a ratio, you know it's comparing two things, but you don't know by just looking at it the way you do a fraction, whether that top number is a part or a whole, or whether that bottom number is a part or a whole. So let me kind of show you an example and kind of show you what I'm talking about. Okay, what if the statement was here? There are 2 baby girls in the hospital nursery and 5 baby boys. So 2 girls and 2 boys in the hospital nursery. What if they ask you, what's the ratio of girls to babies? So do you see that that would be asking you to compare a part to the whole? Well, if it's girls to babies, then girls would be on top and babies would be on the bottom. So there are 2 girls and there are 7 babies in all. So 2 to 7. Now, when it's a fraction, that would be read 2/7. But if it's a ratio, it's read 2 to 7. All right, that bar is read as the word TO, okay? What's the ratio of babies to boys? Well, now you have to put babies on top, so that's whole to the part that are boys. So that would be 7 to 5. 7, the whole, all the babies, to 5 boys. All right, what's the ratio of part to part? What's the ratio of the part that are girls to the part that are boys? So that would be girls to boys. So girls would be on the top. So that would be 2 to 7. Now, because ratios written like this look so much like fractions, often you'll see them written differently, especially with a colon. Like the top number comes first and then a colon and the bottom number. And that would be read 7 to 5. And sometimes they'll literally just put the word 2 between them, 7 to 5. So for me, you can write it any way you want to, and I need you to recognize it all 3 ways. But to work the word problems, it's going to be easier to write them where they look like a fraction. And you'll see why when we do a couple of them. But if I just ask you on a test, you know, what's the ratio of girls to boys? What's the ratio of the correct items to the incorrect items? You can do it with a colon, the word 2, or with that bar that looks like a fractional bar. All right, here are the way the word problems are going to be. Now, a proportion is a statement that 2 ratios are equivalent. So you've got a ratio equals another ratio. All right, and it's just easier when they look sort of like fractions when you go to solve them. It will be something like this. If it takes 9 apples to feed 14 people, how many apples are needed to feed 20 people? Now, the first thing you need to do is recognize that you're comparing 2 things. You see that you're comparing apples and people? Now, you're going to arbitrarily decide which one you want to put on top. It would not matter whether you put apples on top or whether you put people on top. And I'll kind of show you that in a minute. Okay? I arbitrarily decide to put apples on top. So I know that it takes, all right, 9 apples. It takes 9 apples. And see, I decided to put apples on top. So 9 has to be on the top to feed 14 people. So that's the ratio of apples to people. That's got to be the same as, now why did the 20 go on the bottom? Because look, 20 was our people. And I decided I was going to put people on the bottom. So if you put people on the bottom on the left side, you got to put people on the bottom on the right side. And then I didn't have anything up here. So when I don't know something, remember, a lot of times I'll put a variable. So you could put A for apples or X or whatever variable you like. Now, what we're going to do next is what you call cross multiply. Now, we'll talk about this in class. I really don't like that term because elementary students, when they hear multiply, they get cross multiplication confused with fractional multiplication because they look so much alike. So instead, we're going to call it the correct thing. The product of the means, M-E-A-N-S, equals the product of the extremes, E-X-T-R-E-M-E-S. And I'll write that on the board on Monday just to double check it. But it's what you normally think of as cross multiply. So you're going to say 9 times 20, which is 180, equals, and then you do 14 times X. 14x. All right. Now you got a little algebra equation to solve. So remember what we do. Since we undo multiplication with division, if I want to get rid of that 14 and isolate my variable to undo multiplication, I have to do division. So I divided this side by 14 and I divided that side by 14. Now, a lot of times you will not get integer or whole number answers. So if you don't, I want you to round it. But remember, as soon as you round, you've got to warn somebody that you rounded. So I changed it equal to approximately equal. So you take 180 with your calculator or by hand and divide by 14 and then round it off. Now, what is that 13? Is it apples or people? Well, see, it's on the top, so on the top is apples. So to emphasize that, you might write the word apples next to it. Okay, so I need 13 apples. Now, it's kind of hard for me to write in words here. All right, with this little stylus that I've got. All right, so does everybody understand what we're doing? Now, I want you to notice something. I'm going to put a P over an A instead of writing the word out. What if I decide to put peoples on top of apples? Well, if I decide to put people on top of apples, then I would have had the 14 on top, and I would have had the 9 on the bottom. Okay. Well, that would be the same thing as, and it's a sad looking little 9, isn't it? All right, let's try to make that look a little better. Okay. Now, I've got to decide where the 20 goes. Well, the 20 is a people, so see, the 20 would go on top. All right, so I would have 20 up here. And then I wouldn't know how many apples, so I would have an X or an A or a question mark or whatever I wanted to here. So look what would happen. I would have 14 times X, all right, and 14 times X is going to be 14X. All right, equals, and then I would have 20 times 9, and 20 times 9 is 180. So do you see that that would be just like what you had right here, only I have the variable on the left and the number on the right. So I'm going to get exactly the same answer. If I divide both sides by 14, okay, so if I divide the left side by 14, I've got to divide this right side by 14. Okay, and so X, and again, it's not going to be exact, so make sure that you put those wavy equals, that approximately equal to 13. Okay, so it doesn't matter whether you put apples on top or people on top, but when you decide, you've got to stick with your decision. Okay, all right, so now let me go clear these drawings. Okay, and then let's go to the next slide. Do one more and I think you'll be fine. Okay, so look what we've got. If a car can travel 325 miles on 11 gallons of gas, how many gallons are needed to travel 400 miles? So the first thing I do is decide what two things I'm comparing. So do you see that I'm comparing like gallons of gas and miles? Okay. Now you decide whichever way you want to do it. You can put miles on top or you can put gallons on top. That's your choice. And what I have found is it takes about 5 seconds to actually write the words out. I decided I'm going to put miles on top of gallons. That helps you not to get to do a mistake in the middle of the problem. So I decided I want to put miles on top of gallons. So that 325 is miles, so it's on the top, and 11 gallons on the bottom. So that's the ratio that I knew. 325 miles on 11 gallons. Now, why is the 400 on top? Well, remember the 400 is miles. Okay, so I decided I was going to put miles on top. So this time I put the 400 on the top, and I didn't know how many gallons. So again, I put a variable on where my number was missing. Then I do product of extremes. So 325 times x is 325x equals. Then I do the product of that was the product of my means right here. So I do 400 times 11. So I get 4,400. Now remember, I want to isolate my variables. So to get rid of that 325, I have to divide both sides by 325. Because remember, division undoes multiplication. And again, I didn't get an exact answer. So I rounded off to about 13 5/10 gallons. Okay. So when you're working ratio or proportion problems, what you're going to do in the word problem is decide what two things you're comparing, and then arbitrarily decide which one you want to put on the top. And then write in words which one you're putting on top of the other. And then make sure if you put miles on the gallon on top on the left, you got to put miles on the gallon on top of the right. Then do your product of your extremes is the same thing as the product of your means. And then just solve this little algebra equation that follows. So they're really easy, but they're very powerful. I use them all the time. So what I want you to do, all right, so let's kind of stop the sharing. All right, I want you to kind of take notes because we're going to kind of zip through that really quickly in class. And then your homework is going to be on proportions and on decimals. So if you have any questions, let me know. Now, what I'm going to do is put some problems up for a quick pop test. Should be an easy pop test grade off of this video. All right, so make sure that you check, and I'm going to send you an email about it.